So for this video, we're going to talk about some game aids that we employ in our ongoing 5th edition home game at the moment. Two types of things that I have brought examples for here. The first are miniatures as created by WizKids, licensed from Wizards of the Coast. This is a Draconian of some type. This is a Kobold, rogue of some kind based on its armament. And this is a different kind of Draconian. Now, as you can see by the base sizes, this Draconian here is on a medium-sized base, so a standard humanoid, an elf, dwarf, what have you, will be on this size of base, although dwarf will be shorter. The Kobold here is on the slightly smaller base, denoting that it is a small creature, although it still occupies the same 1-inch space on the grid on a map or terrain, as I will demonstrate here in a moment. Whereas the larger Draconian here is a large figure, and this circle will take up a 2x2 grid. And the creatures go up beyond that to 3x3 for a huge, 4x4 is a gargantuan, I believe. Then above that, I could be wrong on that one. Then there's also Colossal after that. Although in 5th edition, Colossal doesn't actually exist anymore. So, above a certain point, it's just big. But anyway, that matters if you're going to be using a map or three-dimensional terrain. If you're doing Theater of the Mind, obviously most of this isn't going to matter for you. So, when it comes to 3D terrain, there is basically one big name in the business, and that is Dwarven Forge. There are other companies that do make 3D terrain. It is of varying qualities. I don't want to badmouth any of them because I do own some of their stuff too. But Dwarven Forge is basically like the high end. It's a little more on the expensive side, but it is well worth it in my opinion. So this is just a sample of one piece. I'll lay out some more here in a moment. You have the option to buy them pre-painted or unpainted. You can paint them yourself. This is a cavern piece. Aside from the water there, like if you were to get this piece instead, this is part of a set, so for this particular set you get both these pieces. But this piece would probably be easier to paint than this piece, in my opinion, as an incredibly amateur painter. Now, all of their pieces that were made past a certain point, and I believe it's the 5th one of their Kickstarters, the Dungeon of Doom Kickstarter, will have magnets embedded on the bottom so that they stick to things, which can come in handy if you want to make a whole layout for a whole room, and that way your players can't see the room until they walk into it, and then you bring it out from under the bottom of the table or from the next room or whatever, instead of having to have sheets of construction paper or a sheet or whatever over it to keep it hidden from them. This also allows you, using the terrain trays that they have, which are much, much larger versions of these little squares right here. They have a metal plate inside of them. They're 12 inches by 12 inches. They allow you to do elevation by stacking, because they have columns, or you can stack on top of the walls or what have you. So, you use these to build out a design of some kind. So, like here are 7 tiles put together, and then if you look, hopefully you can see this, there's a grid ever so subtly built into the tiles. You see the line running here and the line running here to create a 4x4 grid, which matches up with the size of the medium figures, or, like I said earlier, 4x4 would be the size of one of the 2x2 figures. So in this way, the caverns, this is a cavern set, You have a very subtle grid. The dungeon, since it's supposed to be a man, dwarf, elf, whatever made dungeon, the tiles are naturally squared off, so it's easier to see, although it's not hard to see here. Now, the purpose of this little insert piece here is for one of the little add-ons here, because we'll explain that here in a second. So they don't just make flat tiles. Like this is supposed to be some kind of brackish water or poison or something. So you have a tile like this, which before the character steps on it looks just fine, but the top comes off of it, and this would be concealed underneath whenever you build the dungeon initially. So now it creates a hazard that the characters have to avoid via a trap or something. And along with that, the piece that was the bottom, or that was the top, the inside of it has a design similar to the floor pattern, so you can add texture to a spot on the floor if you so desire. Although you'll lose the grid, but it's small enough you should be able to figure out what you're doing there. So as I said, they do make more than just the floors, because it's supposed to be a three-dimensional layout. Some of the floor tiles have very large obtrusive pieces coming up because it's a cavern, and caverns, on the off chance you've never been inside one, are not smooth. They are typically not smooth, but they also have walls to denote the edge of the caverns. So because you're going to be playing on a three-dimensional surface, it's not going to be held up like this. Obviously it's going to be set like this. So here's your wall, your character coming along obviously can't go past that. Although some people, I've seen layouts that they don't use the walls, because you can get by without them by just saying this is the edge, imagine there's a wall past that, and you save money doing that because then you only have to buy the floors. But it's not going to look quite as cool, because all these pieces look incredibly cool, and I hope that's being conveyed in the pictures here. Yeah, so you get pieces like this that have just tons of teeny tiny little details in there, and seeing these on camera probably doesn't really convey what seeing them in person would really show you. But if you don't trust me, check out their website. There's all kinds of pictures and videos from people that are slightly better at this than I am, and so they really pop, and they're generally truthful. Now they'll have other effects, like they have a fog machine hooked up or something like that, but the actual appearance, if anything, the pictures don't sell it enough, but they come very close. Now with the caverns in particular, they try to maintain a certain level on the height, so that, like I mentioned earlier, you could lay the flat plates to go up, but there are also other ways to do it, other pieces. It's easier with the dungeon pieces because they are straight across the top, because it's masonry that's being cut by a person, that's how it appears. So that's kind of a little bit of a difference, and we'll probably in a future video try to compare and contrast some of the different settings. But a note on the construction of these, their earliest pieces were resin, which I don't have any here to show, because they're harder to transport, because there's the chance that they can shatter. But they are more detailed, but the trade-off is they're difficult to transport and they're heavy. These, after their first Kickstarter several years ago, they began to make basically everything in a material they call dwarvenite. It's a plastic of some kind. It's far lighter. You could take these things and throw them up against the wall like a Major League Baseball pitcher, and you are not going to break them. I wouldn't advise trying to run them over in your car. You'll probably dent them. But ultimately, they're very difficult to damage. So, to the point that each of the Kickstarters has come with a cloth bag that you're supposed to carry them in, and you can just fine without dinging or damaging or doing anything bad to them. So, also it's cheaper than the resin, because they do still make the occasional resin piece as like a capstone piece for their Kickstarters. Which is another thing. If you presently don't own any and are looking to buy some, visit their web store. They do have occasional issues with stocking, but they are sorting that out and trying to reorient everything towards that end. But the best deal you're ever going to get is during their Kickstarters, which is where they introduce whatever their new setup is going to be. They're supposed to have one this fall. In the event someone's watching this years down the road, I mean the fall of 2022. And it's going to be a cities Kickstarter, so it will be above ground, which that's one other minor note. Their pieces do come in two slightly different scales. The stuff that is below ground is not a true 1-inch grid. It's slightly smaller. There was a reason for it. I don't remember what it was. They've talked about it once or twice, but off the top of my head, I don't recall what it was. And once they cast the first set from the first Kickstarter in that scale, that was the initial Dungeons Kickstarter. The second one was Caverns. Well, they kept them the same scale so the two could interact. But whenever they went above ground in Kickstarter number 3 to Cities and Kickstarter number 4 for Castles, they switched to a true 1-inch scale. And that had to do with making sure that the buildings all aligned correctly and little bits and pieces with that. And same thing with the castles. But then in their 5th Kickstarter, Dungeon of Doom, going back underground, they went back to the first scale. So they seem committed to keeping the two scales. That doesn't mean the pieces aren't compatible. They are. You will run into a little bit of difficulty over really long runs of pieces, but if you look around online, you'll see that there are plenty of builds that incorporate both of them without any real trouble at all. The only lone exception I know to this, I believe, are the sewers, which despite being underground, they were part of the city Kickstarter, so they're the 1-inch grid. So, it is what it is. But also the Dwarvenite, which is what they call these pieces, are compatible with the resin pieces of old. So, anyway, like I said, they are on the expensive side, or relative expensive. It doesn't really get into real expense until you start going kind of down the rabbit hole, because they have like a generic dungeon set, which one or maybe two of those can build out, one of them can for sure build 3 rooms in a dungeon. So 2 of them would give you quite a bit to work with. And, if you're not looking for super complexity and are fine with squared, rectangular rooms, a few doors and not a whole lot of flourishes, you could get by with just that. And in the near future, you'll even have the choice of their basic sets between those and a slightly spiffier looking dungeon that has columns on the walls and stuff like that, which we'll show you some of those parts to compare and contrast to in another video. The caverns are from 2 different series, but they're designed and painted now to mix and match better, because the paint changed a little bit between them, I believe, but now not. And like I said, they are going back and trying to redo their sets so it's easier for them to keep them in stock from the way they're manufactured. They were having troubles with that, and they seem to be well on their way to sorting it out. So things are staying in stock a lot longer in the store. So anyway, then on the miniatures, as another game aid, are not super expensive, especially if you're just buying one for each of your PC characters, or they buy their own, I suppose. And then you, as the dungeon master, are probably buying the rest of them. As long as you do targeted buying, not blind boosters, because these are sold as in collectible boosters where there's a certain number of them in the box, but you don't know what's in the box, like trading cards. Don't buy them that way unless you're buying them by the case because you want a lot of the figures in the set. Instead, buy the singles that you're after. They'll be a lot cheaper that way. So anyway, I find that these really come in handy. I have a whole lot from a previous game. That's why I have the bulk of them that I have, but I've been buying them since WizKids have been making them also. The train I had for a whole other reason, but now that I'm back to DMing, it's useful for that as well. I've been expanding the collection, and hopefully we'll have some other videos down the road showing the various things you can build from some of these sets, because each of them, like this box of pieces I have here, has the picture here on the side showing you everything that's in it, and there's more than just one configuration, because as you can see, you know, there's nothing forcing you to build these a certain way. You know, they're all, it's interchangeable, mix around the walls. Castles and cities are a little more strict because you're talking buildings which have to flow a certain way for them to work. But dungeons and caves, no, not so much. So anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed all this. Make some comments down at the bottom. If you got any kind of constructive criticism, that's always appreciated. Unconstructive criticism, well, it's a free country, I can't stop you. So, all right, have a good one.